Thank you all so much for joining in on a TGIF. And what better topic to wrap up the week than AI, which is on everybody's mind. But today's is going to be a little different, and also, I'm sure hugely informative and practical because it's not about what tool you're using, what learning in terms of what books you're reading or articles you're reading or contributing to. It's really about a very core aspect of AI, which is your mindset. And who better than Polly to educate us on this? Polly was at the Sidebar Summit, and maybe some of you met her there or even was part of her workshop or roundtable. But thank you, Polly, for agreeing to kind of do this for us here for the benefit of all of the Sidebar members now. And I've known Polly for a bit now, and we're starting to collaborate on AI, generative AI, and agentic content, which I'm very fortunate and thankful for. So thank you, Polly. I've really enjoyed the collaboration so far. And without any further ado, Polly, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Subha. And thanks so much all for joining me. First, a lot of people are saying first meeting of the day, but I know if you're coming from Europe, it's later in the day. So thank you for making time on a Friday. So this is the same workshop I gave at the Sidebar Summit. It was sold out, so people didn't all get a chance to be a part of it. And I think the biggest takeaway a lot of people got from it was that my goal really is to give you some actionable takeaways you can take to your organization right away and implement if you're suffering from some of the ROI woes that I know a lot of organizations are struggling with right now when it comes to AI. Before we kick off, just a quick poll. Who here, and you can maybe raise do the hand raise thing in Zoom. Who here is at an organization where you're implementing AI, struggling with AI adoption and AI features right now? Anyone got their hands up? Give you a quick second. Awesome, we've got a couple. You can also drop it in the chat if that's easier. Excellent. And I'm assuming that, oh, here we go. Hey, Chris, perfect. Awesome. Excellent. Okay. And then the other option is, I'm assuming most people here are looking forward to these challenges, looking to transition into AI. Is anyone identifies that? I'm like, hey, I'm looking to transition into an AI role soon. Is that who identifies on that spectrum? Excellent. Looking to take this. So my goal here is for folks. Okay, perfect. Awesome. We got a couple. So we've got my goal here really is whether you're working somewhere where AI is currently in the spotlight, or you're looking to show that you really understand the impact of what's going on in your organization when you're interviewing at AI companies, that you'll leave with a clear idea of the challenges and some ways to tackle them that are working in industry. So here's what we'll be going over today. And because we're a nice small group, I would like to keep it informal. If you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Suba, if there's something that pops up, please let me know. Thanks so much for doing that. Of course, if we are running long, I might have to speed up and save some questions for the end, but I'll let you know. But what I really want to go over today is just a little bit of background of what's been happening in industry and led to where we are in 2025 with kind of a lot of concern about ROI for AI. And then we'll talk about 5 different mindset shifts that successful AI leaders are making. And then my goal at the end, I have a worksheet that for each of these mindset shifts, you have a couple of questions. You don't have to answer all the questions for all the mindset shifts, but the goal will be to pick one of these 5 as we go. Pick the one that you think is most relevant to you, either in your organization or based on your skill set, the kinds of changes you'll want to drive in an organization. And we're going to have some breakouts where you'll walk through those questions with a partner, just in small groups, to talk about how you might implement those. I've got some tips and tricks on how to move forward there. And we'll talk at the end about takeaways and end up with some Q&A as well. So the questions are at this worksheet. I'm going to encourage you guys to go and load this up right now. We won't be necessarily like walking through it during the whole presentation. And sorry, I don't have a QR code. It's easier just to type this in though, tinyurl.com AI with Polly. It looks something like this. So just so you know, I have a special invitation at the top for anyone who wants to join a workshop I'm doing in a couple weeks. But for each mindset shift, we have a couple questions of like current state, future state, and what bold goal would you take on relating to that mindset shift, right? Um, and each one of these gives you a next step. So again, you don't have to fill out everything, but the goal is to pick one of these mindset shifts. I've also, just so you know, included a lot of the resources from my talk today. So if you are like, hey, where could I get that link or that picture? Don't worry, you don't have to take screenshots or notes or ask for the URLs. We have a lot of those links here. And I've also got some recommendations for where to start if you're looking for how to get my organization started, whether it's some of my favorite prompting courses or prototyping tools that we've found a lot of success with in my company, along with some extra training. So everyone clear what's in that document. We'll be revisiting that more at the end. Awesome. Well, just before we dive in, a little bit about me. My name's Polly. I am passionate about driving AI adoption and especially making AI careers accessible to folks who don't necessarily have deep technical backgrounds. My background is in tech. I started my career as a software developer, and I did my master's degree at MIT in computer science. And I worked as a developer for over 10 years before realizing as an extrovert and a very empathetic person, maybe product was actually the best fit for me. And I transitioned into product a little over 10 years ago. Most recently, I was working at Amazon's Alexa back in 2018 through 2022, where I led the very first generative AI answers on Alexa back in 2020. So it was the first time we had Alexa saying things that we didn't actually know for sure exactly how she was going to say or word them. And we saw a lot of the same challenges enterprises are seeing today, mitigating hallucinations, understanding performance. So it's been a wild ride seeing what our little team was dealing with at the time become a global phenomenon. I left in 2022 really because of my passion to bringing AI adoption and AI understanding to a broader, more diverse set of leaders so that everyone can participate in AI leadership. And that was the founding mission of AI Career Boost, the company I run now. So we run courses, we do consulting, and I also do some one-on-one coaching as well. But our flagship courses have been on AI Career Boost. I've also taught on platforms like Maven and Reforge, some of the first and best rated AI courses on those platforms. Finally, I also have a podcast, the AI Product Leader Podcast. We do interviews with AI product leaders that come from various backgrounds about how they transitioned into AI leadership. So do check us out on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. So I wanted to chat a little bit about the context of how we got where we got. History lesson for those who haven't been involved since, the ancient history of 2022 and ChatGPT popping onto the scene. But in 2023, unmistakably, all the pressure from top down, boards or CEOs on their companies was around build a chatbot. And you'll all remember we saw scads of really terrible chatbots, many of which do not exist today, come to market without much thought about what's the real user value, right? And in 2024, even 2025, that top-down pressure has continued. It's just evolved into, well, okay, chatbots are the thing, but perhaps we just need AI features. We definitely need to adopt AI internally. But it's been a lot of let's use a stick instead of a carrot in terms of bringing employees along to adopt AI internally. In 2023, there was a lot of emphasis on internal use cases. A lot of companies were looking to adopt AI for the first time. And, after some pretty visible failures from companies, like one of the car companies was giving away cars for $1, or McDonald's had a large failure with their generative AI initiatives on ordering. It was definitely advice a lot of consultants were giving to say, hey, let's use this internally, dog food it. It's a lot lower risk while you're learning. And then I would say in 2024, there still has been a large focus on internal use cases, but we are seeing like real value in terms of the amount that companies are saving by adopting AI internally, as well as some of the first real enterprise use cases. And that's really because we moved on from the stage in 2023, where a lot of companies were doing proofs of concept, but they were finding that a lot of problems were emerging with the models as they existed then, right? They felt a lot of lack of control. They didn't understand how to put in the right guardrails. They didn't necessarily have the explainability they needed for legal or user trust reasons. And of course, our old friend hallucinations has been a big problem that continues to plague these kinds of systems. But model and engineering improvements since then over 2024 have made enterprise use cases, especially external ones, the user-facing ones, more feasible because engineers are doing what they do, which is continuing to iterate on those problems. Finally, interestingly, with the structure of teams, a lot of companies who were learning, hey, I think we need to adopt AI. Let's make sure we invest, but we don't want to overinvest in case this is all hype. A lot of companies adopted some kind of structure where they had tiger teams of some kind, right? People who were in charge of going out and finding out about AI, discovering the best use cases. In 2024, I've heard more and more from product leaders that the tiger teams are back. They've been largely staffed, very technical, technically focused, and they've come back and kind of pushed out product teams and product leadership from the decision-making process. They've taken over, and now your roadmap is being run by what this tiger team says you should build, who doesn't necessarily have the context on your user or their needs. So organizations are definitely struggling with this along the way. So in 2025, there's definitely been some movement in a couple of new directions. One of them are, of course, this widespread adoption of AI agents. I've definitely even seen well-known places like Deloitte and McKinsey putting out reports saying things like, if you had hard time reaching ROI with generative AI, well, that's old and bad, and instead you should try agentic AI, which is a little frustrating in terms of like the terms. It's not great terminology to call what we were doing in 2023 generative AI, but agentic AI is new. But there's definitely a preference for anything agentic is better, which we'll cover is not necessarily true for the highest ROI opportunity. But there's also this push. Hey, we've been putting effort into this, money into this since 2023. It's time to deliver revenue. So whether you're at an organization where promises have been made and not been fulfilled, and it's on you to deliver those, or you're coming into a new organization, often the pressure is, hey, we need this to figure out how this is going to pay for itself. And the other pressure too is understanding, why is adoption so slow? So whether that is internal adoption of more automation, or whether it's our customers are just not adopting things simply because they are AI, as many people had hoped, right? So it's definitely the key message from top down has been it's time to deliver ROI. This brings us to the most recent, about a month ago, the CEO of Shopify made waves. I'm sure everyone has seen some version of this with his internal memo. This was originally leaked, and then the CEO himself put it on X in an effort to say, hey, if it's being leaked, it might as well be leaked accurately. And this memo when it was explaining a new urgency around adopting AI internally and how they were going to drive that. So Shopify, of course, is a very technical company. But he expressed that using AI effectively is now fundamental expectation for everyone at the company at all levels. That AI prototyping is absolutely something that must be adopted when you're exploring new systems and features, and that employee measurement will actually involve AI usage. We'll be measuring you on this. Finally, one of the most contentious pieces was expressing that no new headcount would be allocated unless you can prove that AI couldn't do the job, right? So this has been lauded by a lot of CEOs saying, oh, hey, this is how you do leadership, and we need to instill more urgency in our own teams. It's also been criticized from the change management perspective as something that is introducing fear, A fearful workforce doesn't perform the same as an inspired workforce. I think it's really important to understand this in a context that I think too few organizations are recognizing right now. And that is that there are now a lot of small 5-10 person startups that are accomplishing things they've never been able to accomplish with that few headcount and that short time to market before, right? This is a graph of different stacks of companies through different eras, and we're seeing for the first time that like AI powered products and particularly AI first teams are getting to 100 million ARR with far fewer employees, far less time between startup and hitting that metric by orders of magnitude, right? Instead of 1,500 employees or 800 employees, it's now taking 10 or 8. As an example, Lovable.dev, which is a platform for developing your own software simply by putting in a prompt, it develops a full stack app for you. They went from 0 to 10 million ARR in 2 months, right? So we're seeing this rapid ability to accelerate and scale from 0 to 1, but 1 to 10, 100 million, much faster than we've seen before. And if you think of every industry potentially having a competitor who is thinking this way, right? Who is never adding an employee without first testing thoroughly if AI can do the job, it looks a lot less draconian for someone like a Shopify to say, hey, we have to introduce this process ourselves or we are going to be disrupted, right? So I wanted to dive into some of the shifts I've seen successful teams and CEOs make in the face of this. Like I said, pick one of these as the one that you most think is most relevant or urgent for your organization or for your needs. So the first one is what I think about as watermelon goals versus dragon fruit goals. Now, bear with me. I know it sounds a little silly. I learned this from a director at Amazon when I had first joined Alexa, actually, and I noticed we were taking goals that were making a lot of the team very nervous because we didn't exactly know they were even moderately realistic, right? And it was something that was affecting morale. So he talked about he would way rather take goals that were what he called dragon fruit goals. So they may be red and we may not even understand how long it would take to make them green. But at the end of the year, if we didn't accomplish them, the things we would learn along the way would be worth it, right? We would be so much further ahead in terms of understanding how to build these systems, et cetera. That even if our goal was red, no one was going to get fired, performance managed out because that goal was red, because it was still a win. It was still green on the inside, right? And this is in contrast to a watermelon goal, which is, hey, we've set this goal, we understand how we're going to do it. We are green all the way along. Maybe it's green at the end. Perhaps something unexpected happened. It shifts to red. It shifts back to green. But at the end of the day, it didn't actually move the needle in terms of business impact, right? So some examples of this, right? A watermelon goal, a lot of organizations were taking these, particularly in 2023, where they're like, well, all we need to know is we need to launch a chatbot. We need to have some goal related to that, right? And there was never really a doubt that we could figure out how to launch a chatbot. But even if we do, what's the real value that's delivered? Does it have to stay up for a certain amount of time? None of that was clearly specified, right? Or replacing X processes with agentic AI by end of year, right? These are very sort of metrics based on execution, as opposed to something like increase month-over-month user engagement, right? You'll notice this is important because if you can launch a chatbot, you could have very different business goals for a chatbot. It could be user engagement, it could be revenue, it could be decreasing the time someone spends to get customer support, right? And if you don't start from a business metric, it can lead to a lot of confusion. So actually making sure that your goals are based in those business metrics and being brave, even if you don't know how much a chatbot could actually increase user engagement, for example, right? Or increasing internal process efficiency, right? To save X person years. You don't really care if they use agentic AI, to do that, right? Like they use something else. The how is not as important as actually reaching that end goal. And that's where those dragon fruit goals are potentially, stepping away from this micromanaging and specifying how on tech teams, but really owning and holding them accountable for business results and optimizing for that. You'll notice you can identify them pretty quickly, right? So there's the watermelon goals are generally like launch something, execution metrics. They're easy to define and show progress, and you probably have high confidence that you can achieve them, right? But they don't actually provide value versus value-based metrics are harder to argue for at the beginning of the year, especially if your organization is approaching new spaces where this is going to require innovation and change management, right? It's messier to define what should that X be if we're saying we're going to increase month over month engagement or revenue. And you might spend a lot of the year not knowing if you're going to accomplish the goal, right? But it does provide incentives to build AI capabilities along the way. And some of the other advantages, right? So you are being laser focused on value. Culturally, that's a big help. But it also helps you know that you're going to have to build these capabilities, which will make the next project easier anyway, right? So things like capabilities to experiment and evaluate new models. Often new organizations don't understand they're on a journey to build this capability. They'll ask like, what's the best model? How do I pick the best model for my use case? The best model from your use case might come out in 6 months, right? So being able to quickly adapt your whole pipeline to these kinds of changes, a lot of companies aren't set up thinking that way, that they need to build that capability, right? It also
Hey,
helps
Molly,
you. Yeah, question?
do you mind if I interject with a question?
Yeah, please.
I'm just curious, like based on either companies you're talking to or different people who are coming to you from their different company experiences, like what percentage of companies are kind of going about this with dragon fruit goals versus watermelon goals? I
That's a
mean,
really good question.
the
I think,
watermelon's sort of like, we've got to do this, so we're going to get on the train
yeah.
versus we have a good reason to do this, right?
Exactly. I think there's a growing, acknowledgement. Companies that started out earlier in 2023 with watermelon goals are now like,
Yeah,
that was great for a start, but we want to move to dragon fruit goals. I would
right.
still say it's like 60 to 75% are in the watermelon goals kind of arena.
Which is just kind of
And
reactive versus,
exactly, exactly. I
yeah,
love that. I was like, one of these companies is doing AI out of self-defense, right? As opposed to
yeah,
embracing it.
yeah,
Right? And I think that's a great way to argue for these goals, especially dragon fruit goals culturally sometimes are just something alien to a company,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's a change management piece too.
Are
Exactly.
you seeing it like skewed more one way or the other in different industries?
Of course, it's like there's a lot more risk, like in more regulated industries that
Sure.
they're just
Okay.
more risk averse,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And again, so that's that cultural change around like we're
Yeah.
going to have to take some risks to do this is something
Yeah.
that's new for a lot of more regulated industries for sure.
Yeah.
The other skill that this gives you too, that a lot of people ignore is like you actually, even if you're making a terrible guess at how much you can improve revenue or retention, and a terrible guess at how much it will cost you or how complex it's going to be, you're honing that skill too, right? When it comes to ROI, those are two of the big skills is like how much benefit and how much cost. Launching a chatbot as goal doesn't force you to at least try to do that as you go, right? Whereas these goals do. And it also gives you like a ceiling on how much you should be willing to invest. If you say build a chatbot, you don't know what it can do, right? But if you know, hey, here's the business value we're looking for, you know how much you're willing to allocate for that, right? So it's a simple one in concept, but it's harder one to drive if the culture of an organization has never taken these kinds of goals that sound really uncertain at the beginning of the year. But I will say, like, I think all companies need to learn how to be innovative in this department.
Yeah. That's just the DNA of being innovative.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's kind of a forcing function for everyone. Okay, so that was shift number one, dragon fruit versus watermelon goals. Shift number two is how companies are doing validation. And I've seen a lot of skepticism about, hey, is fast prototyping really, you know, the skill that product leaders need, that it's absolutely something that I've seen firsthand can like not just 10x, but 100x the speed at which you can prototype ideas. And these, with the tools that are available that make this fast and easy, there's absolutely no reason not to take advantage of this at this ideation and that like product market fit user testing stage, right? I work in my programs with product leaders to build their first prototype or MVP. That's a sort of learning by doing program. And we've seen folks come from completely non-technical backgrounds, building things that are quite sophisticated. So this was built by a non-tech PM over 6 to 8 weeks. It's called tasteflow.co. You can go and test it out if you like. Everyone I've talked to, when I say this use case, their eyes light up. They get it right away. When you're looking for a recipe and you're scrolling down to the bottom to get the recipe, he wanted to create a tool where you put in your recipe and extracts the actual recipe details for you. It also, you sign in to an account, allows you to personalize that recipe, say like, I want it for dairy-free or gluten-free, adapt it for only local organic ingredients, and save those personalized recipes in your own recipe book. So, so we built this using lovable.dev, that one I mentioned, that builds a full stack app. He was using that just for the front end. And then in the back end, he used a no-code tool that was more like a make.com called hunch.tools, where you can see the process flow a lot more no code as opposed to low code. So for understandability and ease. So cobbling these things together is incredibly quick for people to do now. And even just testing, hey, is a chatbot, a conversational interface, the right interface? You can build a custom GPT in OpenAI's custom GPT tools in like 15 minutes, right? So there's no reason that our main skill now needs to be picking the right thing to test. Test them all, right? Test a bunch of them. We can 10x or 100x our shots at that to get to product market fit. Of course, there's been a lot of talk about prototyping being the key shift in validation. I just want to highlight that really is just the beginning, right? We've been working with a couple of companies that are looking at massively, radically overhauling their validation so that they can automate things like, hey, what does idea generation look like? Competitive research feeds into finding which niche we are focusing on. What is the value proposition for that? But could you even automate even further, right? For the creation of user personas, even driving the research questions we would ask those user personas. The last piece that I think a lot of people are unaware of is this trend towards actually asking synthetic users, right? Derive 30 synthetic users based on my personas. Ask them the research questions, synthesize those research results, recommend the prototype I should build, right? It's pretty crazy how far you can take this. Those synthetic users in studies from some of the top institutions are coming out at about 85% correlation to real user surveys. It doesn't sound like it should work. And of course, it's not something I think will replace actual human validation for high stakes. But using this to find the very best ideas, sift through the biggest user problems, right? Actually generate ideas and do this process in front of your target user. This is something companies are definitely doing. You're not intended to be able to read this slide, but this is a tool called hunch.tools, where we recently conducted a workshop doing just what we talked about here, right? So you put in like the user problem, description of the user personas, and it will generate the next step. This is a place where it's actually taking the user personas and applying the questions to the user personas, ending up with an actual product and problem solution and review. And all of this you can run in 15 to 20 minutes for a new problem, a new set of personas, et cetera, right?
Does
It
it
also,
actually generate the personas for you too?
yeah, exactly. It does research online. It can, you're like, what does my persona read online? What are their sources of news, et cetera, right? So it can, and you can provide references to all of that to go and double check.
What's the name of the tool again? You
So
mentioned?
the Canvas tool we were using called hunch.tools.
Okay, thanks.
And it's one I like in particular. It's been really nice visually when you click play, it kind of you see all the things flickering on and off as it's running. It's also nice because companies using it have found like you can encode, hey, here's how we do user research and validation, right? And if someone says, hey, at this step, should we ask these problems from this framework? Say, hey, like introduce it, add it to the blog. Do you feel like it improves the answers? Like, let's start using that. So it's kind of a central place to consolidate on like what we consider best practice, as well as a way that people have a quick and easy tool to use themselves. So the Hunch.tool doesn't include this entire like breakdown for you, but it's a great place for you to start building your own from scratch. So the key takeaway here, prototyping, it's very hot, but it's for a reason, right? And the product validation has a completely new playbook. This is an area where I think the role of product is changing most quickly. So that's shift number 2, how to think about validation. Third shift. So I wanted to talk about, I think most of you will be familiar with the concept of human in the loop. It's been very well known within AI circles. That's the idea of a lot of AI is not reliable enough without a human checking responses at some stage before it goes out to the customer or user, right? And I wanted to use an analogy for agentic AI versus the aviation industry, where they have been through a lot of this journey when it comes to automation. And a lot of what they talk about in aviation is referred to as human on the loop, as opposed to in the loop. So first, I just wanted to back up, make a quick distinction about agentic AI. I've actually stopped using the term AI agents unless I'm working with teams where we clearly defined what we're talking about, because it means too many things to too many people right now. So, but I will talk about agentic AI, and that I think of it as a spectrum, right? So a use case like just summarize this email thread, things like that, is much less agentic than something that has access to tools, read my emails and write suggested follow-up replies, maybe memory of my previous emails to learn from, right? Or most agentic would be something like managing my inbox to inbox 0. So you're giving it a goal as opposed to instructions, right? And you're asking it to use many more things at its disposal, like tools and memory, and interaction with its environment, to accomplish that goal, right? These are much more autonomous. I think they have more agency, right? They can, but from a product perspective, the key thing to know is they can tackle higher value use cases, right? At the same time, they do introduce a lot more complexity and a lot more potential for errors along the way, right? So they are a bigger investment. The parallel I'd love to make from aviation is about when the first automation was introduced in aviation, right? We're talking about autopilot controls back in the 60s and 70s. At the time, there was a huge fear of automation, fewer jobs for pilots. But as it turned out, there were certain parts of the job where it wasn't acceptable to replace pilots entirely, right? Do we still have, do you think it's technically impossible to take off or land an airplane using automation? It's absolutely possible, right? But that's still a part that we have humans doing because of the risk involved, because of the accountability involved, right? And because this is an area of highest, like most danger in terms of things going wrong. Humans respond best in those situations where there's new environmental concerns, things that are more varied than usual, right? So there's going to be, and especially in safety critical systems, places where we're still going to want humans involved. And it also turns out there are tasks where humans are better, right, at reacting, whether that's during takeoff and landing, but even during unexpected situations, during the course of a regular flight. So the pilot role transformed dramatically from being someone who's executing during the whole flight to someone who is managing a system, right? And I think that's the same translation, like the same transformation we need to prepare our teams for, is that we're no longer the ones operating, but we're managing systems, right? I see us as a very beginning of a journey where it took decades for the aviation industry and lots of unfortunate tragedies to uncover really how to optimally divide those tasks. Where are humans better, right? and design those handoffs in particular, right? For decades, we had many aviation incidents that were labeled as operator error. The pilot did something wrong, when the problem was actually that they were uninformed, misinformed about the real system status, and they were asked to act in an emergency without the right information or the right mental models of what was going on, right? A lot of these human on the loop systems actively involve the pilot in like, hey, I'm giving you a notification, you have to acknowledge it, that aren't necessary 99.9% of the time, right? But they've been shown to keep the pilot's mental model of what's going on active, not bored, not disengaged, so that when interventions are needed, they have an up-to-date mental model of the system status. And I think this is an area that we just haven't begun to explore yet when it comes to agentic AI. We're still in such early days, but I think we're going to need to look at the UX of these systems as providing more and more of these human on the loop systems, as opposed to thinking them from the get-go of completely replacing people, right? So I think that the key thing here is when you're beginning to design internal interactions or for our customers, instead of thinking of replacing them entirely and keeping them out of the loop, right? It's about the systems and interactions. Where will humans still shine, and how can systems help them on, when they need to take over? A huge area of interaction design that I'm sure is going to explode, and it's really exciting to see. Okay, got a couple more shifts to get through. The last one is about delegating to technical teams versus digging in. And this the question that this is going back to that notion of tiger teams, right? We were talking about how the tiger teams went out, they're back, they've taken over. Hear from a lot of product leaders, how do I get the reins back? So the point of greatest leverage is definitely an area that's been super hot lately in some of the top AI companies. I don't know how many of you have heard of the term evals. It's what the cool kids at Anthropic and OpenAI are calling evaluations. And last fall, I was at a talk with CPOs of Anthropic and OpenAI. They both mentioned this, but this is the quote from Mike Krager, that they evaluate, that part of their interview process is they want to see how you think about AI evals. Not enough of that talent exists. But it's really the point where product can imbue their sense of taste and how the product should actually act when you're looking for how to get involved, right? It was interesting, back when I was working at Alexa in 2020, we were looking at summarizing news content for one of the features. So we were looking at long form news content and trying to summarize it for something that was suitable for hearing for audio. So simpler words, shorter sentences. And one of the sets of early examples I had as we were looking at this in April 2020, when you'll remember a certain little virus was taking over the globe, was this headline, right? So I was looking through all these answers that, are potentially in testing coming out. And one of them said, if you ever wonder what it would like to be infected with a virus, you're in luck. It's not exactly the tone we wanted to strike on Alexa at the time, right? This was definitely something that sounded a little insensitive. But the interesting thing to me was this came back from the tech team as a perfectly acceptable answer. And we had given very clear guidelines that it had to be correct, which it is. It had to be fluent. We had more issues with fluency back then with the earlier transformer models. But we hadn't included guidelines to optimize for Alexa's personality, tone. How do we make sure she's not doing brand damaging things? This kicked off an investigation into like, wait, what else is correct and fluent, but not a right answer for us, right? And that included things like, hey, do we want Alexa bragging that she's better than Siri? Do we want her acting like she's advertising or trying to sell things when you ask for the news? Do you want her making pronouncements about the latest elections or giving stock advice, right? And so it was interesting how all of that direction had to come from the product team. And I see far too many teams leaving evaluations gets boiled down to a lot of technical metrics that they're like, okay, as long as it's technically right, I think we're fine. Evals are the place where you can actually say, no, these are the criteria we need to meet and optimize for. And so that we can actually get this to production, and where you can set those like launch criteria and imbue taste, right, as a PM. I've included a link in that document I gave you guys about my evals 101, a guide to how to get your hands around evals if you are in that product space and haven't run into them before. It's about, setting that rubric of what is right. So if you're in an organization and product is not deeply evolved in evaluation, something is wrong. This is something that I would put forward as your most urgent thing to go and get involved in. Okay, one last shift, and then we'll do some breakouts. So the last one is really about our role as leaders managing human AI teams. I call them like cyborg teams, not Cyclops teams, cyborg teams, right? Centaur teams. When the future of work is human agent collaboration, what does management of those teams look like, right? And then related to that is like considering the urgency of potentially you're going to be competing against these AI first teams who are thinking about agentic AI before they look to add humans to the system. And that uncertainty of like, what can and can't it do as we move forward? How can we guide our teams through this with the most empathy possible? And I wanted to revisit that memo from the CEO of Shopify, because it was decried by some change management experts as non-empathetic, right? But I would argue it's actually doing a pretty good job of some of the change management 101, which to me relates to empathy and having empathy for your staff. So a couple of things I thought it did really well. The first thing, as part of the memo, was it spelled out how is AI changing your industry, very specifically, right? At Shopify, they help merchants and entrepreneurs, and having AI alongside the journey, not just doing consultation, but doing the work, is this mind-blowing step change, right? So there's an opportunity here for our users that we might miss out on if we don't act quickly enough. They also talk about like our role, right? And it's a great, I'm like, oh, just copy this note for note. Our role here at company is, what is our role, right? And how do we do this, right? And in their case, in Shopify, they have a mandate for keeping everyone cutting edge and bringing all the best tools to bear. For that, we absolutely need to be at the front edge of this, right? It may not be true for your organization that you need to be at the cutting edge for what you do, right? And I think it's just important here to be honest about the reasons and the urgency within your company and how you should feel this, right? The other pieces they did really well with setting expectations really clearly, right? So he's saying unequivocally, using AI effectively is a fundamental expectation. Here's the phases that it should be used in, right? Dominated the prototyping phase. And they give lots of examples. If you're stuck at your desk going, wait, well, how do I start? It's like, perhaps you can use it as a partner. You can use it as a deep researcher. Think of it as a critic or tutor, pair programmer, right? A lot of examples for a lot of different job functions of how you could be using this. And then their expectation about learning is the one place I think this may fall down for a lot of companies. They express learning is self-directed, right? And at a place like Shopify that is heavily technical, that may be okay. A lot of organizations may need you to provide a bit more structure around like, here's where to start, right? And finally, explaining how they'll be measured. I think this is a critical piece, right? We'll add AI usage questions to our performance and peer review questionnaire. You might not need to add something that that hard to your messaging, right? But it could be you will be measured on the completion of a prompting workshop or course, right? Something like that is getting people started depending on the urgency you're feeling in your industry. And the last piece about understanding that urgency is like, do you need a forcing function, right? So that piece about asking for demonstrating AI cannot do it, that may be necessary or not. And I think it's important to think about what kind of forcing functions you need and be realistic about what kind of urgency you're facing. So just a quick review. I really feel like this memo was a great, here's the points that they hit. So when we're thinking about change management 101, right, how your industry and customers are changing is something a lot of established organizations are not doing a good job of recognizing and actively instilling trust in their staff by showcasing, hey, this is changing. While AI may feel like an existential threat, which keeps you from adopting it, avoiding AI may also be an existential threat. And can you, with empathy, guide them through that, right? I've highlighted here that idea of providing resources for upskilling. That's really why I included some examples of like prompting courses to start with, or tools you could start with prototyping in that guide I gave you guys, if you need some first places to start and get going. So the takeaway there is it's really on us to prepare our teams for this change, this immense change in workforce. I think it's the largest one any of us will see in our lifetimes. And based on your capabilities, where your team is at, providing that clear guidance, the resources they're going to need, right, to balance that empathy and urgency. I don't think it's empathetic to deny these changes are happening, right? Just let people play with whatever they want. Awesome. Okay, so this is where we're going to do some quick, I think we're going to do an 8-minute breakout. So I think what I'm going to do, and I can actually, I would encourage you guys to take a quick screenshot of this if you like. Pick one of these 5 shifts, right? Is it in goals, validation, that human in the loop to human operators, thinking about your systems that way? Is it empowering product, especially around evaluation? Or is it how you're managing teams and thinking of leading them into the future? I'd love you each to pick one of these. And what you're going to do in that worksheet is we're going to put you in pairs and groups of 2. And you're just going to discuss, hey, here's the one I'd like to change, and walk through those questions associated with that one shift. Has everyone got that? Excellent. Shubha, you can get.
And I've also posted the screenshot on chat and
Oh.
the tiny URL and the PDF for folks who can't access the Google Doc is also in the chat.
Oh, thanks so much, Shubha.
Of course, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna
So
give you
shall we
guys.
do breakout rooms?
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. We're gonna do
And
about.
you want to do 2 people per room?
Yeah, I think so. Just to keep it. Otherwise, it's hard to debrief for a lot.
Okay.
Since we've got to do it pretty quickly. We're gonna do this.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right.
8
You're
minutes.
all
I
going to
think
be put in
come
breakout
up from
rooms.
come back for wrap up.
All right. I'm just moving some folks around. There
Yeah,
was
I figured there might be
person
some
that
folks
was
in a 1-person room, and I do breakouts each week with my class, and I'm always like, oh man, this should be easier, especially like you mentioned with the note takers.
yeah. So I kicked out 3 note takers, but I think most people now use granola or otter or something in the background. So hopefully that's okay. There is one room with 3 people. I guess that's okay, right? One every other room has
Yeah.
2. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
And you wanted it for 8 minutes, so another 6
Yeah, so like
minutes.
exactly 6 more minutes. Well, I don't have it's a quick wrap up.
Okay.
I can stay on longer if people have questions too.
Oh, thank you, Polly. We do have an NPS survey
Oh,
to
perfect.
put up, so maybe like a minute to close. I'll
Yeah, perfect.
put that up. Kunjal, are you here or have you stepped away?
Hey, yeah, actually I'm driving, so that's why I haven't joined.
Oh,
I see. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah, so I'm
assuming
getting
then
a
it's
listening
not safe
mode
to
and a
put
viewing mode.
no worries. So I'm assuming it's not safe to put you in a breakout room. So
Yeah, that's why I haven't joined. Yeah.
okay, okay. Good, good. All right. Oh, there's this button here called Plan Next Session. I'm so tempted to click on it and find out what's going on, but like I don't want to, close the rooms by
post
mistake.
everything. Yeah, exactly.
I have to figure out what this is. This is very tempting. Did you get back okay after the summit, Holly?
Yes, totally. Yeah, exactly. Had an easy trip back, which is good. Yeah, totally. I know I'm still that cold that took me out like 3 weeks ago. I'm over it now, but it was like 2.5 weeks. Like I was like, what the heck? It's crazy.
It's something is definitely going on, going around. My son has this perpetual cold for the last like 5 months. And every month it kind of like just erupts with a full-blown flu and he has to like miss school. But consistently it's an elevated level of
Yeah.
like phlegm and
Yeah.
cough
I'm wondering.
and I've taken him to the doctor going like, is there like a mild pneumonia or something? Like, tell us because, we're giving way too much Tylenol at
Did
this
he
time.
have COVID? I'm wondering. For me, I've
Yeah,
definitely,
he had it twice.
yeah, exactly. I've been wondering for me if it's long COVID, and I did a whole bunch of tests and everything, and got to a point where they were like, well, maybe, but there's no real treatment if you do. So it was like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
start taking tests to prove it's something that there's no official treatment for.
That's
So
a good point. I mean, he had COVID twice during the peak COVID times. We tested him now. He does not see, it's not
totally
COVID.
not
So
COVID,
to
but
your point though, I mean, like what could it be? I mean,
I'm wondering too. I'll let you know if I find out more because I before I got sick, probably like a week before, I had gone and done some blood work for something unrelated. They came
uh-huh.
back and they were like, "Oh, by the way, were you sick? Your viral load was really high." And I was like, "No," but I was sick very short after that.
Really?
So I got a doctor's appointment coming up. We'll see what they say about.
Okay. Wow. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Exactly, it's just odd. Yes.
So, have you heard this theory of the intensity of the flu and cold and virus outbreak in the United States is determined by how serious it was in Australia and New Zealand over
Oh,
the summer? Have you heard of this theory?
no, totally, but it kind of makes sense.
Because I believe it all travels.
Yeah.
And during their winter season, which is our summer, they're all falling sick too,
Yeah.
but the intensity of that is directly proportional to the intensity in the US. And I'm like looking for some facts or data to kind of prove this, but my heart wants to almost believe this because I'm like, I am going to follow what Australia and New Zealand are
Exactly. Let's see what they do.
this summer.
I think
Uh,
we're ready to bring everyone back. It usually takes about a minute to get everyone back from the breakout
oh
rooms.
yeah. All right. All right. Should have done it a couple of minutes earlier. Sorry, I got
Oh, no.
distracted by you.
What can I say? I gave them the worksheet already. Awesome. Hey, Dorothy. Welcome back. Hopefully that was valuable. You guys selected some interesting shifts.
Yeah, it was great. Teresa and I have been in a couple things. It was a great pairing, and we're in the same industry. So,
So how did you know?
yeah, it was fabulous. Yeah.
Wonderful. We'll just wait.
Healthcare.
Oh, sorry, Teresa.
We were just saying health tech is much slower to adopt.
Yeah. Do
So,
you find
yeah.
it is the more of those watermelon goals, the like execution-based goals? Yeah.
Oh,
That's exactly
absolutely.
what we talked about. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to yeah, take these more like innovative practices and adapt them to places where culturally that's just never been the norm, right? That safe to fail thing is like has to be applied very judiciously in safety critical areas. Absolutely.
Yeah, by the way, I am in a mortgage industry.
Oh yeah.
And I lead the product and engineering both, and we really want to adapt the AI and everything. But when we sell it to customers are like, it's a loan processing system, POS. What more you can do? Like,
Mm,
we are not going to pay extra, or we are not going to, like, it doesn't matter whether you give us a SaaS product or whether you give us agentic AI product.
yeah.
It's just still loan processing. So I think we are also struggling a little bit now,
Yeah.
which is kind of how far we can go when it comes to allocating the resources.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. Loans and exactly. So it's more about, safety, savings for operation.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. I will be staying on if folks do want to debrief more about have any remaining questions for those who can stay late. If you can't, we're going to do two things. One, I'd love to invite you to an upcoming my free masterclass I have coming up about the skills needed to lead AI initiatives in 2025. It's happening May 28th, I think. So that's at aicareerboost.com, Master AI Leadership. It's free. I'd love to see you there. We'll be going through those skills like evals in a little more depth. And then Suba, you mentioned we need to do an NPS at the end too, right? Just to get your feedback.
Yes. If you don't mind, I'm just going to take over your current share. And I also have the bit.ly link in the chat. But as you all know, at Sidebar, we value feedback. This is the way we can iterate and bring you content that is useful for you. So please take a moment to offer feedback on this session. We would deeply appreciate it. And I can guarantee you, Ha and I read almost every note that you put in. So all your feedback is valuable and welcome. I think now the 10-second awkward pause will start. Well, folks are.
Excellent. And while folks are filling that out, if anyone has any interesting insights from the shifts that they're planning to take, their next steps, I'd love to hear it, or any questions. Glad to entertain. I did see one question someone asked, will prototyping take the place of the PR FAQ at Amazon? I don't think it will. I do think these are supplementary. They serve as a really great spec and they serve for validation purposes. But there's a lot more that goes into a PRD or a PR FAQ document. Hey, what's the vision for what people will say about this, right? Or the FAQs around go to market, how it will work. There's a lot more to explain than just simply here's exactly how the product itself should function. So a prototype isn't a PRD, and a prototype is not a product the same way, a product is not a company. But I think it's a really, really valuable asset, both for explaining exactly how the interaction should work, and validating things with customers really quickly.
Polly, I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Amongst the 5 mind shift, which one is the hardest that you have seen to accomplish?
Yeah. I would say one of the easiest ones is evals. That one, like stepping in and being a part of evaluation, like that's very concrete. And it's really just actually sometimes saying like, no, I really do want to be involved and insisting on it, right? And often the logic of that can be seen pretty quickly, right? That's a great place to start. I do think one of the hardest ones is that watermelon versus dragon fruit goals. We were just discussing with a couple of folks who came off from the, especially in those more regulated industries, right? At Amazon, at the top level, like VP level reporting to Jeff Bezos, they had a mandate that if they weren't failing on 20% of their goals, they weren't being aggressive enough, right? So again, it's something you would hardly ever see at a bank or a healthcare industry, right? And of course, you can't advertise like, hey, we plan to fail on something critical that's going to affect our users' lives, right? That you've got to apply that really judiciously. But I think it's one of the biggest cultural changes we're going through is that even these most regulated industries are having to learn how to do some form of innovation and how to bring that in. So it's tough if you have to really or manage up to your leadership about what these goals should look like. But it can be transformational.
I find that the change management is also hard.
Oh yes, yeah, really, really tough. Exactly. I think like that Shopify CEO memo illustrates, right? It's like I think too many folks are shying away from the change management that needs to happen. And then that explains a lot of the resistance and lack of adoption in their employees.
The one thing that struck me on that email, I appreciate you sharing that as an example, because I agree with you. There's like there is a level of empathy and transparency there.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, at least the portion you showed, maybe there's a lot more to it, right? There was a lack of sort of, knowledge transfer as to how people get started.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
It wasn't exactly like, hey, and we have all these, to your point, trainings, and you work with your manager, they have tools, and like, we're gonna help you through this.
Exactly. So equipping people. I think the point has been made by several Shopify employees that I've seen online or that I know that that's kind of a cultural thing at Shopify that works. But it definitely looks like figure it out on your own.
Right.
Which it does not feel very
well, and
supportive.
some companies have that culture, and it's just
Right.
like everybody understands. Yeah.
Totally, exactly. But it can definitely, you would see how in other companies that could be seen as you're setting me up to fail. This is all you want to do is bring in a bunch of AI to replace me, and you want me to be part of that, and I think you have to acknowledge and mitigate that as you go along. No, great point. Awesome, guys.
Thanks for the session, Polly.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate your time today.
Great, Polly. Thank
Thanks
you.
for hanging there.
Bye.
Polly, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Patty. Bye.